This is the very first Rational Boomer video podcast. Now, some of you are probably saying, oh, for Christ's sake, why does he need to do more? What more could he possibly say? If you know about Rational Boomer, if you know me, you know I do a number of TikToks every day, and you get to see my face. Like that's a win. And I also do a podcast, an audio-only podcast for about an hour a day. Now, for my money, if you like what I have to say and you want to hear it, the podcast is a better bet because all you have to do is listen and you don't have to look at this fucking mug. But still, people came to me and said, you need to do a video podcast. And for the life of me, I don't understand why that's a thing. But when my viewers and my listeners say, you should try it, well, I'll try anything 10 or 15 times till I run it into the ground. So this is a test of sorts. Do we need a video podcast? I'm not sure we do, but I'm happy to give it a try just to see what the hell happens. Now, this video podcast will show up differently than TikTok and the audio podcast. It will only be available on Spotify as far as the apps go, but I'm going to put it on YouTube as well, maybe Facebook, maybe Instagram. I don't know how to do those things, but once I get this done, I'll fucking figure it out one way or another. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Rational Boomer, and I'm not the Rational Boomer, I'm a Rational Boomer. All the people that watch are the Rational Boomers. I'm just Mike, who happens to be a Rational Boomer. And I know there's a lot of you out there too. We talk about what's going on in this country in terms of politics and current events, because I think the media doesn't give us all the information. They give us only enough to stir us up, to anger us, to scare us. So that turns into more views and more money for them. I think this country is woefully misinformed. I think we have media that tells different stories. So we have people that only watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is they watch, and they're all getting different stories. So that, in my mind, is what divides this country. We have so many people misinformed, and they can only go with what they've heard or what they see. And they're not motivated enough to dig deeper. So that's what I do with the Rational Boomer. I look at these stories and then I dig a little deeper. I look at sources that are more respectable, like AP, NPR, BBC. I look at all of them so I can compare the facts and corroborate what's going on out there. So hopefully I can come up with the facts of a story, gain a perspective, and do an analysis of what is really happening, as opposed to what Fox or MSNBC or CNN or any of the other networks wants to spoon feed us for their benefit. So that's anyway what Rational Boomer is about. We talk about the news at hand. We talk about politics. And of course, politics at this moment in time in this country is hugely divided, very contentious. And as I've said, not always that clear to everybody. So what we're going to try to do here with the Rational Boomer video podcast is to clarify some things. Now, I'm not used to being on video for more than 2 or 3 minutes. I can handle that. I can hold my shit together. I can not take a drink for 2 minutes, or I can avoid screwing up or go back and redo it, but that's not going to happen here. You're going to get the real effect, much like you do on the audio podcast, but it will be video. And it's harder to do that way. I can sit here in my underwear in my audio podcast and do a show. Nobody knows. All they hear is my voice. But here I have to consider how I look. Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't consider how I look. I'm a 62-year-old man, and if I was worried about aesthetics, I'd have a lot of fucking work to do. All right, well, let's talk about what's going on in the news. Now, on Wednesday night, President Joe Biden spoke to the nation, and he expressed some concerns about the future of our democracy and some of the violence that's going on, a la Paul Pelosi and that attack by a Trumplafuck out in California. And this is what he said. I'm going to read this because I think it's important. It's something we never saw when Donald Trump was president. This is a president acting like a president. He says, "My fellow Americans, we're facing a defining moment, an inflection point. We must, with one overwhelming, unified voice, speak as a country and say there's no place for voter intimidation or political violence in America, where it's directed at Democrats or Republicans. The will of the voters during the midterm elections, which are already taking place with mail-in ballots and early voting, will determine whether democracy will endure." And he's right on target with that. He said, "Make no mistake, democracy is on the ballot for all of us." Now, the president specifically called out candidates who have declined to commit to accepting the results of their upcoming elections. They're running for election, but they're already bitching about it. There is some 100 lawsuits against elections that haven't even fucking happened yet. It's amazing. The president went on to say, "I wish the assault on our democracy ended that day, but I cannot. As I stand here today, there are candidates running for every level of office in America who won't commit to accepting the results of an election that they are currently running in." He said, "This is a path to chaos in America. It's unprecedented, it's unlawful, and it's un-American." And we know that's been the strategy of the Republicans since the beginning. Create chaos, create uncertainty, and try to squeeze out a win or cheat or steal or lie. And Biden called on Americans to consider whether the votes they will cast will preserve democracy or put it at risk. And I hear a lot of people talking about that, and I want you to understand, if the midterms happen, when they happen, and if the Republicans gain control of the House, that doesn't mean all is lost. That doesn't mean democracy's gone, but it's in danger. That doesn't mean we don't have something else we can do or another strategy or that we stop fighting. I think that's the one thing that we don't hear from politicians. It ain't over till it's over. The Republicans win the House. Sure, it's going to be problematic. Sure, they're going to try to create more chaos. But Joe Biden is still the president until 2024. We will presumably maintain hold of the Senate. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Biden went on to say, "This year, I hope you'll make the future of our democracy an important part of your decision to vote and how you vote." Now, I believe this was a heartfelt speech. I believe Joe Biden is genuinely concerned about the future of democracy and about the violence that we're seeing. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. We're less than a week away from the midterms. This crazy fuck that went after Paul Pelosi looking for Nancy Pelosi, he's not the only crazy one out there. This could happen again. It's likely to happen again. But to who? And how bad might that turn out? We're fortunate that Paul Pelosi survived. Not without some serious injuries, but he survived. What will happen if somebody else tries this again? And who might they try it against? These are all things we never had to consider in years gone by. But since the Republicans have turned this into a very divisive fight as opposed to campaigns and elections, we now have to be concerned about this. Now, the midterms are less than a week away, and Democrats need to take away the messaging. And I think that's what Joe Biden was doing here. He's smart. Maybe he should have done it earlier, but that's how the Republicans have always won. They controlled the narrative. They spewed rhetoric. They lied. They came up with conspiracy theories, and they talk loud and they talk forever. They ended up controlling the narrative. Even though everything they said was bullshit, they were the loudest ones there. And that caused some people, the dumber of us, to believe it. So what the Democrats had to do is take away that power from them. They really have nothing else. They have no substantive anything about them. They have no platform. The only thing they want to do is own the libs, and that doesn't do anything for us. And let's be perfectly honest, that's what they're there for. See, that's the funny thing. Everybody on the Republican side wants to talk badly about the Democrats, but the Republicans have no solutions for any of the problems they're bitching about. All they're doing is bitching. Unfortunately, some Republicans aren't savvy enough or intellectual enough to grasp that. They don't get that. All they want to attach themselves is to the anger and the fight. Now, the media and the polls would have you believe that the elections are close and that the Republicans are surging. I want you to understand something. That's not true. You can't trust polls. I'll give you a case in point. How about the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump? All the polls said that Hillary Clinton was going to win easily. But guess what? She didn't. See, what you have to understand about the polls, nearly 50% of the polling companies are essentially arms or connected to the Republican Party. And the media is kind of like a boxing promoter. They're trying to turn this into a battle of the titans so they can create viewership and make money. It's all a big con going on in front of you. You might get disappointed by the polls, but that's what they want. They're doing what they call flooding the zone. All these Republican pollsters are putting out this information in hopes of discouraging Democrats and them deciding, well, I just won't vote. It's a no-win situation. Well, that's not going to work here and now. It's just not going to work. But that's all they've got. It's a desperation move. But it's important that you understand that, because they're trying to play you. They're trying to get you to be discouraged and stop you from voting. But you won't do that. You know what the stakes are, so you're not going to take that risk. It's not worth it. Now, people will always say to me, how do you know the Democrats are going to win in the midterms? Well, the fact is I don't know. But I've looked at the facts, and the facts just don't add up that the Republicans will win. Take this, for example. 2020, the Republicans lost the presidency by 7 million votes. They lost control of the Senate, and the Democrats maintained control of the House. So I'll ask you this. In the 2 years since 2020, what have the Republicans done to gain votes? They voted against everything that did the middle class any good. They've been caught up in scandals and investigations and indictments. That's what they've done. And then they went ahead and they overturned Roe v. Wade, something we know 70% of this country supports. They're suppressing votes, attacking LGBTQ people, and threatening to take Social Security and Medicare away. How has that improved their lot? I mean, in 2020, they lost resoundingly. And in the 2 years, all of a sudden, everybody's saying, oh, the Republicans are going to win. Why? Tell me why they would win. Now, some people would say, well, gerrymandering, that'll win it for them. And granted, that could have some effect. But what you have to understand is the one way to beat gerrymandering is people turning out to vote en masse. And we're hearing that's happening. I mean, down in Georgia, the early and absentee ballots are beating 2018, which is the last midterm, and in line with 2020, which was a presidential election. That's unheard of. And we're hearing about voter turnout being high all across the country. And it's a common knowledge that when there's high voter turnout, it benefits the Democrat. But still, they want us to believe that the Republicans are the one that's going to win. They might refer to history. They'll say, historically speaking, a Democrat wins the presidency and the Republicans will always win the midterms. Well, that's well and good. It's good to look at history. But what we're looking at now in this country, the things that are happening are unprecedented. These are things we've never seen happen in history. So if everything is so different now, how can you use history as a gauge as to what's going to happen in these midterms? You can't. You can't. You see, to a certain extent, you're being lied to. To a certain extent, you're being played or gamed. That's the Republicans' strategy, always. They can't do it on facts and truth. They can't do it on what they've done for you because there is nothing. They don't agree with facts or truth, so they got to tell lies. And they got to speak louder and longer than everybody else so that hopefully some people will believe. But I know you and me and those of us with a like mind don't believe that bullshit for 1 minute. So if you're worried about the midterm election, here's what I want to tell you. As far as how it's going to turn out, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm just talking here. But if you look at the facts and if you look at all the details as to what's happened in the last 2 years, I just ask any Republican, tell me one thing that tells you the Republicans are going to win. Now, the other thing I want to tell you, if the worst happens and the Republicans do take control of the House, do not despair. The media is basically telling you if the Republicans take the House, all is lost, democracy is gone. Well, that's bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. We've been through times similar to this, and we've always gotten through it. I mean, people say, well, what if you're wrong and the Republicans take the House? Well, I would handle that like I would handle any problem in my life. I'd say, okay, I was wrong about that. No big deal. Now we can't worry about being wrong. What we have to worry about is what do we do next? Because there's always an angle. Keep in mind, even if they were to take the House, Joe Biden's still the president for 2 years. And presuming we hold the Senate, that makes the Republicans pretty much useless. When the Senate and the House are separate, it's hard to get anything done. Now, they might come in and say, we're going to impeach Joe Biden. Well, that's great, but you got to have a reason for it. And there is no reason to impeach Joe Biden, so it will take a shit like every court case that Donald Trump's been involved in. What I'm saying is, if the Republicans do take the House, I'm not saying don't be worried, but don't be afraid. Be diligent. Go after the problem, and let's fix it from there. And so how do you fix the problem? Well, in my mind, the best way to fix the problem is by tearing down the Republican Party. So how do you do that? Well, we have a lot of investigations going on and indictments coming. I think a lot of these indictments are being held back till after the midterm, so there's no accusation about Democrats trying to affect the election. I think Merrick Garland is a stickler for rules, and even though that's not a rule, it is a norm. And unlike Donald Trump, Merrick Garland will stick by that. But as soon as those midterms are over, they're going to start going after people. Shit is going down. In fact, there's some things going on now that we're going to talk about here in a moment that give you some indication of where this is all fucking headed. Now, I talked about messaging and the narrative, and I'll give you an example of somebody who's trying to control the narrative, but it's going to cost him votes. This man is not very bright. His name is Tim Michels or Michelle or whatever the fuck. He is the Republican nominee for governor in Wisconsin. Now, he was talking to a group of supporters this week that I don't know that he knew he was being recorded, but this is what he said. He said, Republicans will never lose another election in Wisconsin after I'm elected governor. He's a multimillionaire construction executive, and he said that during a campaign stop. Well, what does he mean by that? How can he guarantee that a Republican will never lose an election if he's elected governor? Well, the only thing that could possibly mean is that he's going to control the elections, game the elections, And they'll cheat and they'll lie and they'll steal to make sure Democrats don't win. I mean, even in the bluest states, you will get Republicans winning now and again, and vice versa. For him to make that statement, he has to be talking about something more than his power and ability once he becomes governor. This is somebody who's admitting to future crimes if he gets elected. Well, does he think he's going to get elected? I don't think he will. You've got an incumbent Democratic governor who is normal and is concerned about the same things that Joe Biden's concerned about. This man is not going to win the governorship of Wisconsin, in spite of the fact there's a lot of weird things going on in Wisconsin. Of course, you have the Senate race as well. Ron Johnson, who's a notable insurrectionist, a racist, a misogynist, and an anti-Semite. He's up against Mandela Barnes, who is the lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin. Now, Mandela Barnes has gone from being 6% down to Ron Johnson to now he's at about 2%. But this is what I'm telling you. We're hearing the polls, and you cannot believe the polls. The polls don't tell you about a mass turnout, and we're already seeing that's happening. They can't tell you if young people are going to get up in arms and vote. And I think both of those things are going to happen. We're going to see unprecedented voters out at the ballot box, and we're going to see a lot of young people. People will say, why would young people come out? Well, why wouldn't they? I mean, overturning Roe v. Wade doesn't really affect me. I'm 62 years old. I'm not having any other kids. Most of the people that are against Roe v. Wade are people that aren't in a position to have fucking kids. But these young people, if they're smart, they've seen what's going on. And they've seen these old white men dictating what their lives are going to be. And if they have any sense at all, they'll say, fuck that. We ain't doing that. Now, we got an interesting story. And this has got to be very scary for Donald Trump. This is good news for the Democrats, good news for our government, very bad news for Donald Trump. Now, one of Donald Trump's official representatives to the National Archives has been granted criminal immunity and is set to soon testify before the federal grand jury investigating the Mar-a-Lago's documents. The Wall Street Journal reported this. Now, this gentleman is named Kash Patel. You've seen him on TV. He's spouting bullshit at every turn. He's even said, oh yeah, I saw Donald Trump declassified documents. Well, we know that didn't happen. There were no documents that were declassified, none at all. But he was spouting about it. Well, they called him in. They were going to indict him. And guess what? Kash says, maybe I will talk if I get immunity. See, the first time Kash Patel went in, he pled the fifth. And the government, the DOJ, said, listen, we got to get the information from him, but the only way we're going to get it is give him immunity. And there is no loyalty amongst thieves. So Kash Patel said, I'm going to go to jail. So instead, I'm going to give up the information and throw Donald Trump under the bus. And you can bet there's going to be a lot of people that do that. Now, Kash Patel, he's a former Devin Nunes aide who worked in the Trump administration, reportedly invoked his Fifth Amendment against self-incriminating when he testified against the grand jury in October. So the federal judge decided the Justice Department couldn't force Mr. Patel to testify without such protection. So the Justice Department, the DOJ, had no choice. They're going to have to let this guy off the hook in order to get the big guy. And the big guy in this case, of course, is Donald Trump. That tells us the DOJ is specifically focused on Donald Trump. And I think with these document situation, these top secret documents that he stole, Donald Trump is going to get an indictment for this, probably from Georgia and probably from New York as well. So Kash Patel is going to have to tell the truth. And here's what's going to happen. He has immunity if he tells the truth. He can't plead the fifth, no more. And he's got to tell the truth. If he lies to the court, well, then all bets are off. He no longer has immunity, and he's fucked. So this is good news for Kash Patel. He's going to be off the hook. And I'm happy to let Kash Patel, that dipshit, off the hook. He'll pay his price one way or another. But if it means getting Donald Trump, by all means, I think it's a good move. And it's clear, as I said, the DOJ is laser focused on getting Donald Trump. And that's the good news. You got to cut the head off to kill the rest of the snake. And that's what they're going to try to do. Now, you know, Donald Trump is being sued by Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, for committing fraud in his business. We also know that in the Manhattan district that Alvin Bragg is prosecuting the Trump organization, with Alan Weisselberg testifying against the organization. But in the Letitia James situation, they pretty much got him nailed. They're going to sue him for $250 million and insist that he can no longer have a company in New York. So Donald Trump is pissed. So what does Donald Trump do? Well, Donald Trump does what he always does, and it usually amounts to a bunch of shit. Donald Trump has filed a lawsuit in Florida State Court against New York Attorney General Letitia James in a 41-page filing before the Florida State Circuit Court in Palm Beach County. The former president sought to shield his Florida State revocable trust from any investigation by the state of New York. This is always what Donald Trump does. This is the only thing he knows how to do. Donald Trump is a bully. He's always trying to overpower anybody that comes up against him. The problem is you're not going to have much luck by going against the state of New York. The state of New York has more time, more resources, and they will bury Donald Trump. But this is really all that he has left. I'm going to sue you if you continue to sue me. And Letitia James, I think it's clear. Letitia James is going to say, fuck yourself. We don't care. Go ahead, sue us. We're still going to nail your ass. So that's going to be interesting. That lawsuit is coming up. It could be $250 million. Could pretty much shut down the Trump organization. And if that doesn't shut down the Trump organization, if the Trump organization is convicted in the Manhattan district, it's shut down anyway. And anything they find in the Trump organization in the Manhattan district criminal trial will be attached to Donald Trump. Even though Alan Weisselberg refuses to testify directly against Donald Trump, well, the Trump organization is a small organization. Donald Trump and his kids had their hands all over everything. Even though they haven't been indicted directly, they are still going to pay a price. And to be perfectly honest with you, depending on how that court case goes and Letitia James' court case goes, Alvin Bragg may still decide to indict Donald Trump Jr., and Eric Trump. So it's going to be fun to watch. Let's talk about stupid motherfuckers. That seems to be a pandemic amongst Republicans, being fucking stupid. Well, we all know about GOP Senate candidate Herschel Walker. And Herschel Walker was mad because President Barack Obama talked shit about Herschel Walker. He said being a good football player doesn't make him qualified to be a lawmaker. And I think that's a reasonable assumption. I'm kind of loving Obama out there. You know, we needed a tough person to go after these people. And Obama was pretty sophisticated and pretty calm when he was president, so you don't really expect it out of him. But he's going after some of these motherfuckers and tearing them a new asshole. Now, Walker is a former NFL running back. And I'll be honest with you, I live in Minnesota, so Herschel Walker played for the Vikings for a time, and everybody was excited. The Vikings gave up the whole team to get Herschel Walker, and we expected big things. Well, of course, Herschel Walker wasn't quite as great as he was made out to be. And the same could be said for his Senate campaign. He was on Fox and Friends, and he told Brian Kilmeade that he's never met Obama, but if he had, it meant he was a celebrity because all he did was hang out with celebrities. Yeah, that's all Obama did, is hang out with celebrities. Herschel Walker goes on to say, he forgot to tell people I created one of the largest minority-owned food service companies in the United States of America. Not sure that's true. He goes on to say, so I do sign the front of the check, which he's probably never done except when he was in the White House, Walker said. Well, honestly, I don't think Obama signed the checks. I think it was the Treasury Department. But, Herschel's not the brightest guy in the world. Herschel went on to say, I created businesses. I sit on a publicly traded board. So those things I've done outside of football. I'd put my resume up against his resume. I'd put it up any time of the day, and I think I've done well, Walker added. So Herschel's going to compare his resume to Barack Obama. Is Herschel also going to mention the cases of where he's paid for abortions, something he says he's against now? Is he going to mention the domestic violence, putting a gun to his wife's head, threatening to blow her head off? Yeah, I don't think that's going to show up on the resume. He says he was a valedictorian in his high school. Not true. He said he graduated at the top of his class at Georgia. Not true. I don't even know if he did graduate from Georgia. He was too busy. If you remember, when he came out as a Heisman Trophy winner, he didn't go right to the NFL. He went to something that was called at the time the USFL. And he went to play for a New Jersey Generals, I think is the name of it. And guess who owned that football team? Donald Trump. Why did Donald Trump own a USFL team? Because the NFL wouldn't allow him in the group. He wanted an NFL team and couldn't do it. So he goes to the USFL, buys a team. He brings in Herschel Walker. And Donald Trump at the time was being vengeful in this case. He thought he was going to take down the NFL by beating them at their own game with the USFL. Turned out he actually took down the USFL. He blew that to shreds, and it died a whimpering fucking death. But if you want to compare resumes, let's do that. First of all, and this is just a few of the things that I think already beat Herschel Walker. First of all, he was president of the United States. He pulled this country out of the worst economic times in my lifetime, and there wasn't a hint of scandal. No abortions, no domestic abuse, no guns, fucking nothing. That's what Obama did. He was an Illinois senator. He was a state senator. He graduated from Columbia College, and he graduated from Harvard Law. So Herschel, if you want to compare resumes, I think you're shit out of luck because you haven't done jack shit. All we have to do is listen to you, and you're an ignorant fuck. You have no business running a company or being a senator. You don't have any business doing anything but bopping around and getting women pregnant and abusing said women. You have no business being a senator, and I don't think you will be. I think you will be beaten soundly. In spite of what the polls say, Herschel Walker, I believe, will be beat. We know there's a tremendous turnout in early voters in Georgia. That doesn't spell good things for Herschel Walker. Now, here's something interesting. We know about the court case in the Manhattan District. Alvin Bragg is prosecuting the Trump Organization because of fraud, that he paid his people with perks like homes, like tuition, like cars, and those sort of things, and nobody ever paid taxes on them. That's why Allen Weisselberg, the CFO of the company, pled guilty to 15 years of crimes, 15 separate cases of fraud. This also had to do with the overinflating of the values of his company and underinflating the values of his company. So what does Donald Trump do and his lawyers do when the case starts? Well, they do what you'd expect. They try to throw Allen Weisselberg under the bus. Allen did it all. I didn't know anything about it, which seems weird because we know that Donald Trump had his hands on everything that went on in his business. Still, he wanted to say, I didn't know anything about it. It was all Allen Weisselberg. We should take him down. You've already convicted him, so we can just go away. We can just stop. Well, again, former President Donald Trump is a dumb motherfucker. There's always a paper trail. Former President Trump signed the lease of an Upper West Side apartment used by former Trump Organization Chief Officer Allen Weisselberg. Prosecutors showed the jury at the criminal tax fraud trial on Tuesday. So Allen Weisselberg got this Upper West Side apartment from the Trump Organization in lieu of money, and nobody paid taxes on it. That, without question, is fraud. Now, Donald Trump says he doesn't know anything about it, yet somehow he signed the motherfucker. Nice try, Donald. That court case is pretty much over because they proved what you did and what the company did and what Weisselberg did. Now, the lease represents part of the prosecution's efforts to show that the Trump Organization and its executives engaged in years-long scheme to avoid taxes, one that was sanctioned by highest echelons of the company, according to Bloomberg. And when they say highest echelons, that means Donald Trump and his family. Weisselberg, the prosecution's central witness, received a $6,500 a month apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and $10,000 for moving fees from the Trump Organization. Now, the lease shown to jurors on Tuesday noted that the apartment was meant to be leased by Weisselberg or other company employees and was signed by Donald Trump himself. Well, Donald Trump, you're fucked. You're fucked. The proof is in the pudding, or in this case, the proof is on the fucking lease. Last story, and then we'll wrap things up for this very first Rational Boomer video podcast. Former President Trump's legal team viewed Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas as the key to the group's efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election in Trump's favors. How do they know this? Well, there are some emails. Remember the 8 emails that John Eastman didn't want to give up, but the court saw otherwise, and the January 6th committee and the DOJ got those emails? Well, against the wishes of conservative lawyer John Eastman, a federal district court judge last month ordered the release of 8 emails to the House committee investigating January 6th insurrection, and that these emails show that Eastman and other Trump attorneys were discussing the post-election strategy. Think about that. They lost the election, but now they have a strategy to try to get it back. That smells like fraud. That smells like election fraud. That smells like the 14th Amendment. Now, the House panel's attorneys included a Dropbox link to the emails in a court filing Tuesday evening. The emails reveal that on December 31st, 2020, a message from Trump's attorney Kenneth Chesebro to Eastman and others. And this is what it said. We want to frame things so that Thomas could be the one to issue some sort of stay or other circuit justice opinion saying Georgia is in legitimate doubt. They wanted and believed that Clarence Thomas would say the Georgia election was in doubt. The very same election that Donald tried to strong-arm the Secretary of State to give him 11,780 votes, the same state where Lindsey Graham, who now has to testify, made 2 calls, the same state where Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows went to Georgia to try to pressure them to turn it over to them. Now, Cheeseborough wrote, realistically, our only chance to get a favorable judicial opinion by January 6th, which might hold up the Georgia count in Congress, is from Thomas. Do you agree, Professor Eastman? Eastman responded, I think I agree with this. If the court were to give us likely, that may be enough to kick the Georgia legislature in the gear, because I've been getting a lot of calls from them. Now, for months and months and months, Republicans would try to have us believe that a bunch of people went protesting because they were fearful of the future of our democracy. Things got out of hand, emotions got out of control, and they just attacked the Capitol. Shit happens. Well, now what we find out is that there was a lot of planning, a lot of strategy leading up to this. They were covering it all different angles. They were trying to come up with a way where they could create chaos and enough dissension that somehow Donald Trump could go in there and control the narrative. Now, we know this is Donald Trump's strategy for most things. Remember what he told the DOJ back when William Barr was the Attorney General. He said, yeah, I know you don't see any election fraud, but just say there is, and I'll take it from there. And members of Congress will take it from there. The whole plan is pretty evident. They were going to try to create the chaos and the uncertainty and somehow wrangle away or wiggle away to get Donald Trump back in office. That is clearly illegal. That is clearly an attempt to overthrow our government. That's a serious problem. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, why hasn't it been that we haven't heard about those sitting members of Congress that were involved, the Lauren Boeberts, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Paul Gosar, the Jim Jordans? We haven't heard from them. It goes back to what I've said earlier. We will hear about them. They will be exposed for what they are, but it won't be till after the midterm election, because Merrick Garland doesn't want to be accused of trying to affect the election. I think that's probably not the best choice. I mean, if somebody got caught having an affair with somebody else and they wanted to wait till after the election, okay, cool. But our fucking country's on fire, and the Republicans are a dumpster fire. Time is of the essence. They should be attacking this ASAP. But we know Merrick Garland is methodical and meticulous, so we're just going to have to let him do it. And the fact of the matter is the midterms are less than a week away. Once that happens, come November 9th, shit is going to start to fly. And Donald Trump is not going to like it. And neither are his acolytes, his little buddies, or the sitting members of Congress that will be exposed. Because I can assure you that the J6 committee will expose those sitting members of Congress. They've said as much, but they've held back. The last J6 hearing was not the last J6 hearing. There'll be more coming after the election. Now, people are saying, well, if the Republicans win, they'll shut it down. Yeah, that's true. But the Republicans won't take their seats until early January. So that leaves 2 months. 2 months to expose this shit. I think the plan always has been that the J6 committee will be done before January 1st. Everything will be exposed, and then it's on the DOJ. And guess what? Even if the Republicans win, once it's in the DOJ, Congress has no power over it. It's on the DOJ, who they're going to indict, who they're going to prosecute. So the Republicans can't game this situation, even if they win the House on November 8th. So there are a lot of people worried and concerned, and you should be, but don't think the world is going to end regardless of what happens. Because when it's over, if the Republicans lose, there's going to be a point-by-point destruction of the Republican Party. All these sitting members of Congress that were involved in the insurrection are likely to be expelled from Congress. That is going to absolutely destroy the Republican Party. And if the Republicans win in the midterms, that's the next strategy. Take them down one by one and decimate the Republican Party. All right, I've talked enough. That's going to wrap it up for the very first Rational Boomer video podcast. Let me know what you think. You can always email me at rationalboomer@gmail.com. Don't forget to check the TikToks, and don't forget to check the Rational Boomer audio podcast. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Audible. You can get it on all that stuff. So check out the audio version of the podcast. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.